My name is Brent Toderian. I'm the Director of Planning, the equivalent of the Chief Planner and the Chief Architect for the city of Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, which is the third largest city in Canada on the west coast of Canada. It has a very similar population to Copenhagen. And it's considered quite a progressive and counterintuitive city by North American standards. Most North American cities find us quite odd because we do things very differently, but we are routinely named one of the most, or if not the most, livable cities in the world. It's always very surprising to me when I see the Copenhagen waterfront to not see more people on it. And in the number of days I've been here and in my previous visits, even on bright sunny days, there are not as many people as I would expect. And by comparison in Vancouver, the seawall is our primary public space. It's the equivalent of our squares. And it's teeming with people, biking, walking, people watching on any reasonably good day. In Copenhagen, the public squares are busy, the cafes are busy, the patios are busy, but the waterfront seems to be relatively quiet, relatively dead, and that's very surprising to me. But not as surprising when I start to look at the pattern and I think about why. And certainly the way we in Vancouver design our waterfront is very different than the way Copenhagen has apparently designed its waterfront. The main differences in design, I think, is the way we address the publicness of the waterfront space. First of all, I think like Copenhagen, we have had a strong principle that the water edge should always be public, and thus Copenhagen takes 8 meters of water edge, I understand, for public access, and I hope you keep doing that with all of your buildings along the waterfront edge, because that's our first principle for waterfront design. But the main difference seems to be how the building relates to that public edge. In Vancouver, we require that all buildings relate very powerfully and in a very friendly way to the water edge. Shops and cafes, or just doors, residential doors, constantly along the water edge to really activate and energize the water edge, make it a more interesting, safe, and vital place to be. Whereas as I walk and bike along Copenhagen's waterfront, I see far too much dead space on that first few floors, particularly at the first floor of the buildings that frame the waterfront edge. And to me, that's the reason why they're dead. If you activated those spaces more, you would have more life by design than you do now. Well, we put a lot of living down at the water edge because people love water and they love to live there. And we certainly have destinations, entertainment districts and such, and we're planning even more. We're going to put a new Vancouver Art Gallery on the water in the same way that you've put your cultural house and your opera house on the water. But we have a lot of housing along our waterfront. We've created a series of livable, complete, high-density neighborhoods along our waterfront, very high density, to create a strong critical mass of people who are right there. And they are what invigorate the water edge, because they're right there. It's their neighborhood, it's their public space, it's their backyard almost. And they make it interesting and active. If it's too far away from the people, then it's too hard to get there on a daily basis. So we've got incredible concentrations of people. Our highest densities are along our water edge, and that makes it vital and alive. But then we also, of course, make sure that the design facilitates that liveliness. You can't just have the people and then do the design poorly. You have to do both. You never make it private. In Vancouver, the water edge is always publicly owned. And so there are people whose doors are right, or patios are right on the edge, But they know that that space is theirs, and the space beyond it is the public's. They may not like it, but then they had the choice not to buy there, to live there. So the people who do choose to live there know that they are living along an active public seawall. So the main way we do it is by ownership. The city owns the land. But then we also do it slightly by design. All the patios and dooryards are slightly elevated. There's a slight change in grade. It's not flat. So people know that that slight elevation defines their place. And then when you get down to the seawall, and it's just a few steps. It's always just a few steps. It never needs to be more than that, and it's actually a bad idea to do more than that. But anything less than that, then it becomes a debate about who owns what. We find that the slight change in grade defines the semi-public space, which is technically owned by somebody else, but the public interact with it, at least visually, from the fully public space, which is the place that the public owns, and these folks who live along there cannot control the destiny of that public space. It is for all people. Potential is everywhere. All of your water edge has to be public. There are never, in my opinion, there cannot be spots where the waterfront is alive with other spots that aren't. Vancouver's waterfront publicness is universal. It wasn't always that way. It was built up over time. It had to be done incrementally. But because of the consistency of that vision, and it's the first principle, the first vision of waterfront planning in Vancouver, because of that consistency, now it is consistent. Now it is complete, or almost complete. We're finishing. But now it's a great experience where you can ride or walk or along it in its entirety. And you never come to a spot where you have to stop because private ownership has taken away the publicness of the water. That's deadly to the system, in our opinion. We never let buildings interrupt or private land interrupt the public continuity of the water edge. Well, you never let, if you have areas along the water that went wrong, maybe it's owned privately or there's a building that interrupts, well, it's never an excuse to do the rest right. And often people will say, well, it's already interrupted, it's already scattered, so let's not worry about doing the rest right. Well, of course, we would disagree, because the vision over time is to get it all right. And you start with the pieces you can fix. The other pieces, sometimes it takes time. Vancouver had private ownership along its waterfront edge in the early 50s, 60s. In the 70s, Vancouver bought many of them back. And thank goodness they did in the 70s, because it would be much more expensive now. But the theory is you have to have patience, consistency of vision and patience, and eventually you will achieve it. The beauty of city planning is we think very long term. But you have to make every decision today correctly, or else you won't ever achieve the long-term vision.